Thank you everyone for joining this webinar. So my name is Ashpreet. I'm a final year PhD student at University of Florida, and my research is in the field of waste management in general. And for my current research, I'm looking into zero waste programs on colleges and trying to understand what are some of the factors that lead to better zero waste programs, which means leading to better waste diversion, waste reduction, and minimization programs. So today I'll be sharing what I have done in my research and the methodologies that I have used. Let me see. I might not have the, okay, I wasn't able to find the next page. So just an overview of why I wanted to do something in the field of waste. So we talk about climate change, and that is one of the big issues that we want to focus on, but I want to bring the attention on the idea of waste crisis and why it's important. So waste is one of the important factors leading to climate change, because if we're able to take out some of the waste away from the landfills or even reduce our consumption in general, we'll be able to reduce the emissions coming from the landfills and emissions coming from all the resources that we have been using, and able to reduce it and divert it. So talking about US, so US generated 292.4 million tons of municipal solid waste in 2018. That's the latest data that we have. And that is a lot of waste that we have been generating, and we should be looking for efforts how we can reduce the amount of the waste we're generating. So just an idea that I wanted to throw, for example, this movie, WALL-E, we can see that our future might be looking closely to that, in case we are not reducing our consumption, we're not reducing the way we use resources. So in this movie, humans left this poor robot to clean all the trash that humans have been generating. So that should not be the case. We should be aware of our duties and what we can do. So I've used the idea of linear and circular economy. I'm sure most of you will be familiar with it, but just an overview. So in linear economy, we take the materials, the raw materials, we make the product, and then we dispose it at the end, which creates a lot of pollution and environmental issues. But the idea of circular economy is to take the materials, use it, and keep it into the circular loop. We reuse it, we remanufacture it, we recycle it, so that nothing goes out to landfills. So what is zero waste? So a technical definition of zero waste will be diverting 90% or more of the waste from landfills as well as incinerators. So incinerating waste is not considered a zero waste approach, because if you're incinerating waste, it creates air pollution and issues of environmental injustice. That's why incineration is not included in the definition. So also, zero waste really focuses on the top three. For example, the upstream ideas of rethink, redesign, reduce, and reuse. And then the bottom, like recycling, material recovery, and incineration. These are the least acceptable steps, and incineration is the unacceptable step. And if you would know, recently UN also celebrated March 30th as International Zero Waste Day. So we celebrated our first International Zero Waste Day on the March 30th. So that shows how it's not a new idea, I would say, but it shows like how aware people are becoming about it now, and why I should be focusing on this kind of a study. So talking about some of the ways people have been doing it, for example, how to achieve zero waste. It could be through our infrastructure. We need to have recycling bins which are labeled, composting bins. So all these facilities need to be available into the institutions for us to reach towards zero waste. And some of the policies, it could be banning the organics in landfills. For example, in California, they ban the landfills, they ban the organics in the landfills, and they also have mandatory compost collection for some of the institutions. And talking about some of the programs, for example, you can see in the picture that in the last picture, students are doing education and food and donation programs. So having these programs which are aimed at educating the masses on the campus, these can also be some of the efforts. So the way the zero waste advocates divide these factors is based on the infrastructure, policies, and programs. So why I want to look into higher education institution is that what I found is that in the existing studies, and even in the sustainability frameworks, they don't have enough understanding on what are some of the indicators of waste. They talk about sustainability in the sense of water and energy efficiency, but in waste, they mostly just have downstream indicators. For example, just the amount of waste generated, recycled, and all those things. So they don't have indicators which help us understand how we can reduce waste. That's why I wanted to do the study focus on institutions, especially because most of the studies have been done on cities who have focused on zero waste or making zero waste indicators. And that's the reason I wanted to study institutions to see what are some of the institutional factors that could be indicators of zero waste. So how to reach 90% of waste diversion to be zero waste? That's like the basic question that I'm looking into. So I've done mixed method analysis, I have done quantitative regression analysis, statistical analysis, and I have done qualitative analysis where I have interviewed some of the zero waste experts in the field and understood what their experiences are and what barriers and opportunities are in this field. So I basically used the sustainability tracking assessment and rating system to derive all my variables. So my quantitative study, the statistical study, all my variables are derived from this rating system, and I was able to export them into the Excel sheet and just running some regression analysis around in the statistical program that I use as data. So the dependent variable that I use is the score on waste diversion and minimization, which is again derived from this report. And the independent variable, I have a bunch of variables again derived from the report, but they're mostly informed from the literature review that I've read. Just a second, I'm gonna drink water real quick. So sorry about that. So just talking a little more about the kinds of variables that I've used. So I have some variables that focus on how having full-time employees will affect the waste diversion and minimization score, or how having a sustainability plan will affect the waste diversion and minimization score. So these are the variables that haven't been explored in the sense of zero waste. People have explored it in circular economy, but then again, circular economy is mostly for industries and studies done in the industrial sector. So that's where I'm bringing the concept of circular economy into and merging it with the concept of zero waste. So for the surveys and semi-structured interviews, so I did a convenience sampling. So basically, from the data that I had in the stars, I had the names of a bunch of zero waste coordinators, sustainability coordinators in those reports, but then I had to Google their email or even LinkedIn because they didn't provide the email to me. So that was a really long that extensive work that I needed to do. But I was able to get reach 250 emails, but some of them were not working or some of them did not reply. So from the 250 people I reached, actually 32 people replied to my survey. And also based on their experience and their age, I screened them. So I had 32 people to work with for my survey, and 32 is a good number to work with for the type of analysis that I was doing. So I did a 3-round Delphi survey, which is a consensus building survey. And the idea is that we are able to forecast what are some of the barriers and opportunities based on consensus of all the experts in the field. So in the round one, I asked them to list the barriers and opportunities in the field of zero waste. It was a very basic round, and everybody had sent me their responses, and I made a unique statement out of the responses, and some of the responses were of course overlapping, so I was able to get unique statements out of it, which went to the round two. And in round two they had to rank those statements from 0 to 10, so based on how important the statement was. So 10 means more important. And in the round three, they basically did the same thing they did in round two, but that's where the essence of Delphi comes in. And in the round three, I provided them with the averages from round two. So each statement had an average, and that was shown in the round three, so that in case they want to change the the score they have provided to the survey, they can change it based on how their peers are ranking those statements. So that's where the consensus building part comes in. And then I also did semi-structured interviews with these 32 people. So I invited them to take part into my interviews. And out of 32, I was able to recruit 10 of them, and they were interested in working with me more. So I did some in-depth analysis of uh, the statements that I was able to get consensus on. So the top 5 barriers and the top 5 opportunities, they went into the in-depth analysis for my research. So this is just like a theoretical background. Every research needs the theoretical background to enforce the thinking and put together the research. So it's just a basic system that I wanted to work with. I'm not testing any hypotheses in my research, or I'm not like taking a theory and molding it, but I just wanted to have something to back up why I want to look into the micro, meso, and macro factors. So any institutional factors means anything occurring inside an institution. I have considered them as micro factors, for example, implementing the zero waste goal or hiring the employees, because that's governed by the institution. And the meso level factors are anything that the institution does in collaboration, either with the other institution, or either with the city, with the local community. So that meso really means an interaction between, sorry. So meso really means interaction between two entities. And then in the micro level factors, in the macro level factors, these are any factors which is external to the institution. So institution doesn't have control on these factors. For example, if the state has a mandatory recycling policy, so that was the policy that the state adopted, not the institution, but that is going to affect the recycling system of the institution. So some of the results that I can quickly talk into. So through my analysis, the regression analysis that I did, I was able to see that having a sustainable procurement policy and providing training for non-academic staff member, that was really significant in my analysis, and that is the micro level factor that I was talking about. So it tells that having these variables into my regression model, it really improved the model, and they were significant in uh, reaching more diversion rates. And the measure level factor, I had one variable that was significant, that is state sustainability members. So it talks about if the institution is a member of a sustainability network at state level. So if they were, so those institutions really had more higher scores, and they had better based diversion programs. And the macro level variables, which were uh, affecting the scores, were institutions in the West, for example. So I consider it macro because, again, it's not up to the institution as to which state it wants to be in, but it's just like a natural variation that occurs. So institutions in the West, they're usually proactive, for example, in California, because the state in the California is so progressive with their policies that it really affects the waste management in the institutional level as well. And then public institutions have better scores, and that's mostly because public institutions have a lot of research going on, and they receive a huge governmental grants, so that's why they have uh, more better performance than the private universities. And then is the state's rank in waste management. So depending upon, this was derived through an external data set that I used. It was a secondary data set, and I wanted to see how it affects the institutions. So the institutions that were in better waste managing states compared to the others, they had better scores, which really means that state really affects the zero waste programs on campuses. And from the surveys and the interviews that I did, I was able to get 11 barrier and 7 opportunities statements to consensus after the end of the round 2. And then from that, I took the top 5 for the interviews. So really putting the interviews and the survey together, these were some of the findings I was able to find. So the green part is the opportunities, and the red part is the barriers. So for example, having a zero waste policy, good relationship with stakeholders, collaboration with local organization, having a sustainable procurement policy, and presence of active student bodies. These were really stressed as good opportunities in my survey, and as well as the interviews really helped me understand why. So I'll talk about that more in the coming slide. And then in the barriers, I had lack of compliance with the recycling, absence of engagement in waste reduction activities, lack of full-time employees dedicated to zero waste programs, lack of continual education outreach, and shortage of ground labor. So these were the barriers that really came as most important after the survey. And the color coding you can see is that the light green color, again, these are the micro level factor. The dark green is the meso level because it talks about collaboration, as I mentioned earlier, and the red part also is the micro level factor, but I put it red just to differentiate between the opportunities and barriers. So this was just some of the examples I wanted to put that came out of my interviews, and how I was able to create teams out of it, and how I was able to make some arguments. So for example, why having a zero waste policy is important. And people talk about that. They don't have, first of all, currently they do not have such policy, and that they would like to be working on it, or they would like to have such policy included in the strategic plan. And then why having such a policy would be important is because it really holds the university accountable. It will help us understand what are the targets, goals, and the responsibilities in achieving these plans. And similarly, things related with procurement, why having a procurement policy is important is because, for example, in one of the interviews, if you can see on the top left corner, they mentioned that in their departments, in their university, because they do not have a centralized procurement policy or a mandatory procurement policy, the departments are really just doing whatever they want to. For example, they are buying the stuff that they want, and they are throwing away whatever they want. So there is no regulation or restriction on what is coming in and going out of the university. So this is just an example I've put to see how I have created themes out of my interviews and guided my explanation. So just combining everything together based on my research, I really want to talk about the top 3 important factors that I really feel have been important in my statistical analysis and also in my survey and interviews. As first of all, having a centralized and binding sustainable procurement policy. So procurement really means purchasing. So why we want to have such purchasing policy, as I discussed, that currently it's very decentralized. Departments are really bringing anything onto the campus. There is no check on it, or there is no mandation, or there is no fine. So that's one of the biggest opportunities that universities can work upon to increase their to increase the effect of their zero waste programs. So it was also important in my statistical analysis. So it really tells that using these 2 methods, I was able to come up that this is important. So there could be other ways of understanding the importance, for example, doing case studies. So that could be like a future direction where the study can go. And then having continual education and outreach. This was really important in my survey and interviews, because people really talked about that the education and outreach program needs to be continual, like at the beginning of every semester when we do orientations. That's where the orientation to sustainability or even waste management programs need to occur, so that everyone who is coming on campus, they're educated about what kind of zero waste activities the university has pledged or what kind of goals they have. So this is also one of the themes that had been reoccurring in my research. And then thirdly is having zero waste policy, which I also talked about earlier. Why it's important is to have those plans and goals and targets and hold people accountable to it. And it really shows that how committed the university is in reducing the waste on their campus. So just the implications for future research. So all these factors really could be understood more in depth doing case studies. That's one of my directions and my recommendations for future studies. And these factors can be used as guidelines for the other institutions in the US, because I only worked with 274 institutions. So there are a lot of other institutions in the US that can really use these as the guidelines to really make their zero waste plans or understand how this can affect their waste diversion and minimization. It also has possibility of being implemented in cities, just because the literature shows how similar the administration and the governance of the city is with the municipality. So really some of these can work in the cities and used as a guidelines. And that is it with my presentation. So in case you want to find some other references that I have used in my presentation, you can go click the scan the link. And if you want to talk more about my research or want to know other projects that I might be involved in, you can add me on LinkedIn and we can talk more about it. But that is it with my presentation, and I would like to welcome any questions now.
Thank you so much. You've done really wonderful research here. And the first question was, when you were screening higher education institutions, you said you limited it by country or reporting framework. Did you also limit it to four-year institutions, or did the type of degrees offered play no role?
No, that was one of the variables in my research, actually, because because I found that doctoral institutions are actually in the literature shows that they have better scores and sustainability in general. So I really wanted to know how that had been playing a role. And I was able to find that doctoral institutions, it was a statistical finding in my research that doctoral institutions actually did have higher scores on the waste diversion and minimization.
Interesting. Thank you. And then the second question was, when you talked about the importance of having a zero waste policy in a strategic plan, did it matter if it was in a university-wide strategic plan, or was a sustainability specific plan good enough?
So the first idea was to have a zero waste plan in general to work with, having a separate zero waste plan, which has clear targets and goals. And then the idea that emerged was to have it included in the strategic plan, actually. Sorry, because the idea was included in the highest planning document of the institutions, and most of the time it's usually the strategic plan. So that's why including some of the goals in the strategic plan came out to be important.
Okay. And then as of now, the last question is, how did University of Florida, your current university, compare on average?
So the University of Florida wasn't in my analysis because when I was collecting my data set, they didn't have any recent reports to work with, because the data set that I use, it's very complex, it's very dynamic, and it changes every day because every day institutions are reporting to this framework. But the time when I collected the data in 2020, at that time UF didn't have any recent valid report to work with, so it's not included in my analysis.
Wonderful. And I guess my last question now is, what next steps do you have for your research as you have now concluded it and are doing all these presentations? Are you going to do anything else with it or present it anywhere else?
Yeah, I'll be presenting it at the International Solid Waste Association's conference, and that's an online conference. It will be in September. So right now I'm really writing all these things together, more like making these arguments and improving my writing, because it really takes a long time to put all these thoughts together. So I really have a lot of comments that I've been getting from my advisors. So I'm currently like revising what I have written.
Wonderful. Okay, if anyone has any last questions, you're welcome to unmute, or you can connect with Ashpreet over LinkedIn. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Ashpreet. This was a wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed learning about your research, and I know the students in our program are really going to enjoy taking more note of your work. I know I took a lot of notes and look forward to going back and taking and learning more from what you said. So thank you so much for joining us, and good luck with your future endeavors.